Hello, I'm Craig Constantine.
And I'm Terry Price. I'm a writer, photographer, I'm a certified labyrinth facilitator, and a podcaster. I can finally say that, Craig.
Welcome, Terry. I'm laughing at finally. What do you mean finally? This is not just the beginning. You are well into your journey. I love to talk to people. Like everything we do on this show is related to podcasting in some way, shape, or form. But I love to find where people's previous experiences overlap with podcasting because we all know podcasting pretty well, and then it's these neat little insights we get. So when I was talking to you before, you mentioned coming from an audio background, from an analog background, and that for you tech was the challenge. And what I'm curious about is what when you think back to the I'm going to say the analog Terry. When you think back to the analog Terry, what was it about digital and about podcasting that really felt like it was something you wanted to move into?
Well, it was not digital per se. Digital was the necessity. If you're
Right.
going to do podcasting now, you've got to be digital. And so when I went through college, I majored in communications and radio and television and did quite a bit of radio, did a lot of play-by-play work with sports, did some
Oh,
news, did a little television and did sportscasting there. And all that involves storytelling. And I love storytelling. I'm a writer. And so I like working with words and keyboarding and physically writing. I love all of that. But there's something different about the oral story. I mean,
hmm.
all the stories and things that we do nowadays, all of that started as oral storytelling. And so
Yeah, that
that's always
tradition.
been close to my heart as an oral storyteller. So when podcasting came along, by that time I had transitioned out of my radio and television career. And it just seemed like a natural fit for someone who likes to write, likes to tell stories. And now I could do those stories orally. And so the trick was then in the old days with analog, and you had to work with tapes and
Literally
physically, yeah,
splicing, right?
literally splicing and putting those together and making them,
Yeah, and the
sound
cutting
good.
room floor. It's a literal
Yes,
thing. The stuff
it
falls on the
literal. That's
floor.
right, literal cutting room. I get tickled nowadays when I hear people with digital equipment say, "Yeah, I left that on the cutting room floor." I said, "Yeah, well,
Yeah,
no, you didn't."
or I hope I get good tape is another one.
Yeah,
Like, yeah, I know what you mean, but that's not how that works.
yeah, yeah. So with the computers and the digital world and everything, in order to have really good quality, it had to become digital at some point. And so I did
Right.
not want to do analog and then try to do some converting and things. And so got up to speed with some equipment and tech and feel good about it, feel reasonably competent with it. And so I've been doing it now for some months and I just dearly love it. It is scratched the itch that I hoped it would.
Do you go out on a limb. Do you feel like it's also this multi-armed hydra that just tries to take over your life? Because I feel that way because once you figure the tech out, it's actually really easy. Oh, look, I just hit this button and then I could just
Yeah,
make 17
yeah,
hours of me talking
yeah,
to a microphone, and then you got to
yeah,
deal with that, right? Like
yeah.
it's so easy really to do, but then to make the thing that matches your vision or your imagination is really hard. So how do you, if you agree with me, how do you wrestle with that octopus of like, yeah, now I can dig this huge hole, then how do I find the time to edit? How do I find the time to do the editorial and the script writing beforehand? And how do I decide what I want to talk about and what I don't want to talk about? How do you wrestle with that?
Well, that's a really big question, and first of all, I do agree with you with regard to the octopus hydra analogies. And as a creativity coach, I mean, one the basic tenets that I try to coach and teach is that everybody's a creative. We all have things we can go back to our childhood and figure out things that we did while we played that made us
Mm,
happy. Those things are still there. It's just that in a lot of cases, we quit doing them because they are supposedly frivolous. They're not making money, and so we're no longer have the ability or permission, I should say, to play.
right.
So, along with that concept of creativity, however, is this notion that whatever you do, if you are really being creative, you're bringing forth something that previously didn't exist. So, all of my notions of what my podcast would be were helpful to instigate. But in reality, it's a work in progress. I
Mm.
discover something new. I did a script for the first one and I thought, gosh, I really like that. But what if I do this? And then I interview and then I start pulling in sound effects and then so all of that is energizing and exciting and fun. But to try to figure out where you're going and then to find new directions as you are going along the path, it does require more time. It does require more energy, and so sometimes it can become a little daunting as well as exciting. But I do love it. I do love it. But what you're saying is right. Now, I'll say one other thing, and that is that a good friend of mine told me one time, because I've been very active and involved in a lot of things, and she said, "Terry, you need to understand, just because you can do everything doesn't mean you should do
Right.
everything."
Right.
And so
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of it's a website and a culture, a community, Abbey of the Arts, and they teach this concept of we generally know what we want to do, or we use in spiritual terms what we're called to do.
Right.
Okay, so we're pretty good at that. But the concept that they introduced to me, they call that your spiritual yes, your sacred yes. But they say if you're going to do your sacred yes, you've got to learn a sacred no.
Mm.
You can't just be
Yeah.
taking a bucket and saying, okay, well, now I'm going to do this.
Yes. Yes.
Now I'm
Yes.
going
Yes.
to
Yes.
add
Yes. Yes.
podcasting to this. I'm going to add this to this. Oh, I've got a family. Oh, I've got to eat too. And then we have a pandemic, that you have to be able to say, all right, if I'm really going to do this, if this is something that's really essential for me, then what is it that I
Mm.
can let go of? And so that's part, I mean, it's a daily struggle. It's not a checklist where, I say, oh, yep, this, and oh, that's gone, done. I
Yeah.
mean, it really is, it's a daily struggle, because my tendency is to say, you want that done? I can do that. Yeah. Let's do that.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
I can. Yeah.
Yep. Yes,
Yes,
I
and
can. That's
very,
it. That's
very
this.
improv
Yep.
oriented.
Yep. The
Yeah. I
ego
yes
creeps
and
up and says, "Hey, heck yes, you can do that." And you have to say, you know what? Maybe
yeah.
not. But now's not that time.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I yes and myself to death. Like I just how did I wind up with 50 things to do today? Huh. And, for every finger I
I
point out, there's
know.
four that point back at me. Oh, physician,
Yes.
heal thyself.
Yep.
Um, so I totally agree with you on the struggle, and I have some ways that I attack that. Like in particular with this show, I actually made a list and I was like, well, what are all the things I hate doing? I hate editing. All right. There's no editing. I hate post producing intros and outros. There were no intros and outros. I just deleted all the stuff that I didn't want to do.
That's
And then
brilliant.
everybody says that, but it's kind of, what's the phrase? That's a stern mistress. Like
Mm,
that means that there's no place to hide. That means that
yeah, it's true.
I need to I need to show up, and like I have a certain little personal, like I go through, lights and my stuff and like I spend a few minutes specifically on the guest before I show up in the call. Like I have a routine, but there's no excuse. Like if the call doesn't happen and the thing doesn't get recorded and published, like where was I hiding? Because I
Right.
deleted all the stuff that I didn't want to do. So
Right.
it cuts both ways. And then I have this call to like, well, maybe I can do 4 in one day. Could I do 6 in one? I had like, oh, do more. And so it took me a while, like 70 episodes, to get into the habit of, what you were describing made me think of this. I didn't realize it, but it took me a while to remember that I had said no to a bunch of stuff, editing, trying, all these pieces. And I all of a sudden felt like I had to say yes by stuffing in more actual episodes. I'm like, no, you said no to all those pieces. Just keep doing a few. Like, so
Right.
that even though I know about the yes problem, I just automatically tried to do it by trying to schedule
Sure.
reaching out to more people instead of
Sure.
just letting the pace, be more organic. So, that's just me commiserating to say, yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Well, I think part of it's a cultural thing. I think that, again, we live in a culture that rewards busyness, that rewards
Mm,
productivity.
yeah,
And so if we have what we would consider to be a down period, we've got to fill it. We could do more, so why aren't we doing more? And there's a sense where we don't appreciate self care as we
right.
should. Yeah. And so, and there is this concept of, quality over quantity. So, and that's part of what I think I've been struggling with a little bit in this morphing of my podcast to become eventually what I think it will fairly consistently be. And that goes back, I have to remind myself that when I was doing radio work, 90% of it was live. And so, like you're saying, you eliminate a lot of things when you're doing a live broadcast.
The light
You,
comes
you
on.
yeah,
You better say
you
hi.
have a cough switch, and that's about it. I mean,
Right.
everything else is live, and so you learn how to work through that method. And so, in starting the podcast, however, with having the ability to edit, it became, like you say, a severe taskmaster. It was like, well, that's not exactly perfect. Go back and
Mm,
eliminate that. Oh, you can read. Oh, listen to that. You can
mm.
redo that portion. Do that again. And so again, that's the ego cropping up. And then at some point, you
Yeah.
start to think, nobody's going to notice that. Nobody's going to. They're if they're tuning into this, hopefully they're not sitting there with a pencil and a pad keeping score of,
Yeah.
oh, well,
I heard
there's,
him breathe.
yeah,
I
it's
heard him
like
breathe again.
my gosh, what's this man doing breathing? Like a baseball game, how many errors, how many
Yeah.
hits, how many errors, and
Yeah.
people aren't doing that. They're listening for the content, a connection, something that they can walk away from feeling better, smiling, learning something. I mean, I think that's at least my experience with the way I approach podcast. I want to come away
I
feeling
completely
like,
agree.
yeah, I've made a connection. I've learned something. And that's something someone else told me one time, said, we need to get past this concept of perfection and focus on connection. And so
Yeah.
again, that's just part of my journey in terms of becoming a podcaster.
Yeah. It's so interesting to think about who's actually listening. Is it the the person who's like dropped in on episode 62?
Right.
If I forget to say the name of the show in my intro, that matters because they'd be like, what am I listening to? What is this? Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
but if they've listened to all 62 of them, any moment I spend doing anything that's like meta is wasted time. Like
Yeah.
we don't need to talk about how the sausage gets made. And I struggle with that a lot. And in this show, I didn't even say the name of the show. I'm not even sure I know what the name of the show is. So it's just like, in some ways it's fun to strip all that stuff off and think, maybe somebody would drop in and listen to one of these, who's like a former business associate of yours who doesn't even work in podcasting, who's just like, I remember Terry, he's my friend. They might
Right.
listen to this episode and
Yeah.
they're not going to judge me based on whether or not I did the 5 things that you have to do in every introduction.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
so I think I do better work when I don't focus on the process and the shoulds
Hmm.
and the coulds, and
Right.
instead, just have pleasant conversations, or what I think are pleasant conversations
Yeah.
with people. So, yeah,
And sometimes those are
another cough
distractions.
switch.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll pretend like
I
I did.
do, but it's a mute button. I don't want to hit
Yeah.
the mute button.
Um, sometimes those things can become a defense mechanism, because to me, the actual germ, the actual essence of the podcast, I mean, that's really the hardest and most rewarding part at the same time of doing this. But I can put that off and I can go listen to 14 different possible music beds to determine what I'm going to use for my
Yeah,
opening.
right.
There are a lot of things that you can do that we're proficient at. We feel like we're accomplishing something, but we're putting off that which really is the essence of what we're trying to do, because
Yeah,
it's important to us. We really want it to be right. And again, sometimes we want it to be too right. We want it to be too perfect. And that's, again, I think that's a struggle for a lot of us. I think that's part of the reason for
I think I'm telling
procrastination.
you, I've talked to a lot of people in the context of podcasting. Everybody says that, and I'm not diminishing what you're saying. I'm just saying,
No,
oh my
no.
god, everybody says that. It's totally a thing. Which makes me wonder what's this is a hard question, but I'll give you 2 flavors to choose from. What's something you're currently struggling with in podcasting, or the harder flavor is what's something that you're doing because you're hiding from something you should be doing in podcasting?
Wow. Um, yeah, that's a great. Those are great questions.
And it's
I think
horrible when you have to choose.
Yeah, I think the I think the hardest part for me as a creative writer is that I work basically in fiction, and I'm not on any deadlines.
Mhm.
So I can sit and muse and look out the window, and when I feel inspiration, I can take off with it, or I can write um, as the author Anne Lamott called them shitty first drafts.
Right.
You don't have a good second draft or a good third draft till you get through the first one. And
Right. Show me
so
your
with
bad work.
yeah, exactly. And so you can throw all of it out there, knowing you can clean it up and make it better and make it right. And you can do that in scripting for podcasting, and a lot of what I'm doing scripting. And again, that's something I'm kind of working on to figure out what the balance is going to be. But if I'm going to do this and say, I'm going to put out a podcast once a month, or I'm going to put out a podcast once a quarter, or once a week, or
Mhm.
whatever, you don't have that luxury. You don't have that luxury to sit there and say, is that adverb really the one I want?
Yeah.
You got to push through because there is so much time spent in addition to the actual recording to get that out there. And so you can't just say, okay, I'm going to put out one a week. I'll work 6 days on getting it recorded. You've got to stay on task. You've got to push through. So I think that's the hardest part for me because I don't want to let go. I don't want to. I want to keep working on that paragraph until I feel like
Yeah.
it's a really good paragraph. And
That is
for me to do this on a
I
consistent basis, I'm
yeah.
going to have to let go of some of that.
I yes, I don't script because almost all the stuff that I do is with other people, conversations. And I find it really hard to do host on mic because maybe I just don't enjoy scripting, or I'm like, well, I probably should go do that. If I feel like it's hard, that's the challenge. I should go work on that. But I was just reading a blog post. I don't know if it was a new one or an old one. I don't know where I found it from Stephen Pressfield about
Hmm.
he had a mentor when he was first starting out. I think it was his first agent. The guy was like, older than marble. And the guy said to him one day at lunch, "What's 467 minus one?" And Stephen dutifully went, 466. And the guy went, "No, zero, because if the book is supposed to be 467 pages and you're at 466 and stop, you have zero books." He's like, it's funny is I was just thinking like, oh, there's such deep wisdom in like, yes,
Yeah,
but you have to finish, Craig. Like you have to actually
yeah,
push the publish button or
that's right.
whatever the definition of done is.
That's right.
Um,
That's
so
a great. I
any
love
more
that
words of
story.
wisdom for people who not everybody that I talk to does podcast host on mic, and I'm just wondering, since you've done so much writing, and you've also done like live radio work, what maybe insights you've brought? For those are two very different fields, right? It's two completely different areas. If there's any insights that you now realize that you got from those places, like writing showed you something, maybe it is just ship it, and maybe something that came from radio about, you got to just keep moving forward. Like I'm just wondering if there are insights from these two very diverse fields that you now realize you're using within podcasting.
Well, right off the top of my head, a couple of things. One is that when I'm writing, and I think this is fairly universal, if you're not careful, the ego will tell you, here is your knowledge and your experience. Now put that out there. But for me, the joy of writing, and I think the joy of the experience of the reader, comes from my discoveries as I put words down. And I think that's part of the fun of
Mm.
doing host on mic, because by writing that, I'll start off with a broad concept of what it is that I'm wanting to do, and then let the words kind of carry me. I think it was Flannery O'Connor, probably several people said this, but something to the effect of, I'm not really sure what I think until I write it down.
Did I
And I
write it
think
down?
we are that way a lot of times. And so that's part of the joy for me. And I'm hoping that as someone decides to sit down and take this 20-minute journey with me, that they will start to pick up my epiphanies and my revelations to me. I mean, that's really that when I do a podcast, I don't have this grandiose idea that somehow people are waiting on my every word. The podcast really, for me, is a journey of self-discovery. And it's one I want to share with other people. You have something really good that happens to you and you want to share it with somebody else, and
Right.
then they get excited. And so that's kind of where I come from there. And then the other thing is, a writing mentor of mine one time said that you never finish a work, ever. You never finish a work. You abandon it. And I have
Oh my God.
always thought
Amen.
of that, because we have this concept, again, going back to perfection, that we're gonna finish it. And what he
Right.
says is, you abandon it, and in one of a couple of ways. One, you literally just say, never gonna, yeah, that's gone. That's delete, it's
File
gone.
13, right?
Yep. And then you have another one that you believe in, but you just, for some reason, you're not pushing through. There's just something, it's just not quite there. So you set it aside. And it's a temporary abandonment. And during that time, your subconscious plays with it, when you're off
Yeah.
doing something else, and then all of a sudden, bing, and you pull it back out and you're able to work farther on it. And then the third is when you release it, whether it's printed word where you send it to a publisher, or a podcast, you finally say, I'm going to abandon this by uploading it.
Yeah. Good
So I can
enough. Right.
start on the next one. It's not that it's perfect, but it is what it is, and we move on. We finish with that, and we turn the corner and say, all right, let's do another one.
Terrific, Terry. I always hate to say it, but I think that's a good place to stop. So thank you I know we spent a lot of time working on scheduling to get together, and I'm so glad that we made it happen. Thanks for taking
Well,
the
thank
time.
you, and thank you for your persistence. I like that better than your word. Your word was pestering. I don't like that word. I like persistence.
You're
I
very
never
welcome.
felt I never felt that you were pestering.